Hello, everyone. I'm Angela Taylor, your host for Unlocking the Club, and welcome to another episode of Unlocking the Club. Today, I actually want to talk about some of those moments that matter. And I want to honor the lovely Michelle Obama and her recent speech when President Obama and Michelle Obama had their portraits revealed at the White House for the first time. Not only was Black love on display, but during her eloquent speech, Michelle Obama amplified a perspective that I think we need to share and hear more often. And so here's a few excerpts from her speech that I want to read to you. And these were some excerpts that resonated with me. And we'll talk a little bit about it on the back end. She went on and thanked so many people at the opening of her speech, but then she had some really poignant moments that resonated with me. And it started like this. Believe it or not, it is still a bit odd for me to stand in this historic space to see this big, beautiful painting staring back at me. You know, growing up on Euclid Avenue, as she looked at her mother, she said, I never could have imagined that any of this would be part of my story. But even if it's all still a bit awkward for me, I do recognize why moments like these are important, why all of this is absolutely necessary. She went on to say later in her speech, so for me, this day is not just about what has happened, it's also about what could happen. Because a girl like me, she was never supposed to be up there next to Jacqueline Kennedy and Dolly Madison. She was never supposed to live in this house, and she definitely wasn't supposed to serve as First Lady. But I've always wondered, where does that supposed to come from? Who determines it? Then she said, too often in this country, people feel like they have to look a certain way or act a certain way to fit in, that they have to make a lot of money or come from a certain group or class or faith in order to matter. As Barack said, if the two of us can end up on the walls of the most famous address in the world, then again, it is so important for every young kid who is doubting themselves to believe that they can too. And this little girl from the South Side is blessed beyond measure to have felt the truth of that fuller story throughout her entire life, never more so than today. Whew. I was listening to that and I just had to pause everything that I was doing and take it all in, because every single word that she uttered impacted me. It was actually the premise behind starting Unlocking the Club. And her willingness on that global stage and in that monumental moment to share her truth was a gift. It was a gift to all of us, Black women, Black men, boys and girls, those who identify as female, those who identify as Black, right? All of us. Her grace and commitment to sharing her story and the impact it had on me, as well as I'm sure the millions of others who tuned in, underscores why Unlocking the Club has come to be. Storytelling is powerful. And what I have recognized over the years in so many of the conversations that I've had with my peers and family members and Black women who have had an impact and have inspired me along my journey is that sometimes we don't always tell our story, or we share bits and pieces of our story, not the full story. And I think it's so important for us to share those moments, those things that happen in the private moments, those things that can feel debilitating, those things that inspire us, those things that have us pause and reflect. There's so many aspects of our journey that are important for us to reconcile and to pause and notice, and are important for others to be able to hear so they can see themselves in you and in your story and know that they are not alone on this journey, that things that may be going on or obstructing their progress, if you will, may not be unique to them and don't require them to dig in deeper and get another degree, right? But to look at the system that may not be a system designed for them to be successful, so that they can start to see themselves in a place where they can be successful, where they can see their portrait on the wall at the White House from time to time in the future. So I just wanted to share that moment. That moment truly mattered to me as I was listening to someone who I have great adoration for. That stage, take the time not just to revel in the honor of having her portrait revealed, but making sure to share her journey with many of us who see ourselves in her. So thanks for listening to that moment that mattered to me. I want to talk a little bit today about more moments that matter to someone who has had an extraordinary journey. And I'm looking forward to unlocking the club and the power and the stories that she has to share as well. So our special guest today on Unlocking the Club is Anucha Browne.
Welcome to the Unlocking the Club podcast, where we host honest and direct conversations about journeys of access, personal truth, and reclaiming space. We share our truth so that you can find the key to own your truth, honor your journey, and reclaim your space. Grab your keys, your wallet, your phone, and invite your friends to meet you at the club. Here's your host, Angela Taylor.
Today on Unlocking the Club, I will be joined by Anucha Browne. Anucha is an accomplished executive with deep cross-sector experience and a legacy in women's college sports. And she recently joined Tides as its first Chief Impact Officer. In this role, she leads the execution and implementation of Tides strategic initiatives to advance the organization's goal of strengthening the power of BIPOC-led organizations and their communities. Before joining Tides, Anucha was the Chief Advocacy and Engagement Officer at UNICEF USA, where she was responsible for managing strategy, engagement, advocacy, congressional relations, emergency response, and domestic programs. She pioneered domestic programs and grants in support of vulnerable children in the U.S. impacted by natural disasters, disease, and migration. She also launched UNICEF's Child-Friendly Cities initiative to build safer and more just, equitable, inclusive, and child-responsive cities around the world. Previously, Anucha served as the NCAA's Vice President of Women's Basketball, where she set the strategic direction and oversaw the operation and management of its Division I, II, and III Women's Basketball Championships. Anucha has also held executive leadership positions at the University of Buffalo, the NBA, and IBM. And she credits her achievements to the passage of Title IX, which gave her the opportunity to play basketball at Northwestern University and gain valuable leadership skills. Thanks for tuning in to Unlocking the Club as we have a conversation with Anucha Browne Sanders. Anucha, thank you so much for joining me on Unlocking the Club today. How are you doing?
I am wonderful and grateful to be here. Thanks for inviting me.
Absolutely. Well, first, I know you recently took a position at Tides, and often in this show, we talk about who you are on your journey versus what you're doing. But I know there's such an incredible work that the Tides organization does. And I would love to hear more about the work that you were doing specifically and what the Tides organization is doing.
Sure. Well, Tides has been around for more than 45 years, and the organization has really been dedicated to shared prosperity for all. However, more recently, we have changed our impact goal, right? And so much of that is in response to where we are in this country in particular. But it really is about shifting and strengthening the power of BIPOC leaders, organizations, and communities. And that shifting of power is very different from the philosophy of charities, giving. So it's a call out, right? And it's a call to action. It's not about giving. It's not about charity and philanthropy. It's truly about shifting power to our BIPOC leaders. And so I serve as the organization's Chief Impact Officer, really being able to look at that and measure that over time. What does shifting power actually look like in communities of color or communities that are led by BIPOC leaders?
Amazing. If you don't know about Tides, make sure you go to the website. We'll have information here at the bottom of the screen and in our show notes. Check out what they're doing, support what they're doing. It's really important work. And so it's grateful that, Anucha, you are actually leading that impact as the organization continues to pivot and find a space to have a tremendous impact here in the future. And I get curious, we talk about transitioning, and you have had a transition throughout your career where you've gone from the corporate space at IBM to a long journey in sports and now into the nonprofit space. Like, how has that journey been for you personally?
Oh man, when I think about it, you think about peaks and valleys in your career, starting out in this very, very corporate environment. It's where I really learned on the ground and worked with individuals and really kind of honed my skills in terms of identifying what individuals really want from organizations. So it was that customer serving, really face serving work that I did for 11 years at IBM, but working at the Olympic project was fantastic. That catapulted me into a career in sports, basically, where I went to work for one of the most storied franchises in all of indoor sports, which is the New York Knicks. And, getting that job, you're kind of like, I don't even know if you have to pay me for that job. But there's a lesson in that. And it's about fit, and it's about making sure that you're working for organizations that really match your values. And then going from there to working in the collegiate space, I'd like to say that really was my entree into nonprofit, right? And because collegiate space is nonprofit, and then working with young people and helping them develop their own platforms, and then going on to work at the governing body, national governing body for collegiate athletics, the NCAA. And it was as if my career went full circle, where I was suddenly working for to manage women's basketball. And then from there into the humanitarian space and the human rights space. So it's been a neat journey, but there is definitely a through line, and that's in lifting people and developing people, which has been kind of how I've been wired for my entire career.
Well, I love that through line, and that is evidence, right? We've known each other for years, but no one's counting. And I agree, like, it is obvious that the things that resonate with you and are important to you on that journey, and you've had an impact along the way in significant and prominent roles at each stop in your journey. But I wonder, like, who did you have to be, Anucha, along the way to navigate so gracefully and graciously so that you could have an impact?
Well, maybe the best way to kind of answer that question is, getting this opportunity to be the Chief Impact Officer at Tides. I'm working for this incredible CEO, Janice Evans Page. It's the first time in 40 plus years that I've had the opportunity to work for a Black woman.
Oh, wow.
And it is life-changing. She starts every meeting with, "Hello, Queen. How are you doing, Queen?" And I'm pinching myself saying, is this really happening?
Yeah.
But really, when you look back at it, it's been 40 years of code switching. It's been 40 years of making people feel comfortable with me in their space. And navigating that is exhausting. We like to say Black exhausting.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
women would say it at a different level, because here you have the 6'1", dark-skinned Black woman who's tried to navigate corporate space, the sports space, entertainment space, the collegiate space, and now the humanitarian space. And there is a whole different level of expectation or microaggressions that Black women experience. You're too direct, or you don't come across as soft enough. I've had somebody tell me, I need you to adopt a more nurturing management style. And you sit there and go, what exactly does that mean? So the navigation and the experience has been more than interesting, but I share it, and I share it very authentically.
Yeah. Well, and I want to unpack so many of the things that you just shared, right? From code switching to being asked, right, to make yourself small in order to make others feel comfortable. But I want to dig into, so how did you have to show up when you're hearing all these things? And I know at this stage in your journey, you can sit back and reflect, right, on, like, maybe I don't have to choose to do those things. But in the midst of that journey, when maybe you didn't have as much power and influence, how did you show up, and how did you have to show up, and what would you do differently?
Well, I had to show up as I had to show up. It was really about making them feel comfortable with me in their space. And I remember going home and saying to my father one day, I'm so tired. I'm tired of being the only one. I'm tired of having my ideas dismissed only to be volunteered by a white male next to me and have the entire room go, wow, what a great idea. It's exhausting. And I remember complaining about that. And my father, who, came here from Guyana and was a messenger, and then, went into a medical field, and then ended up working at a brewery as a microbiologist for years. He said to me at the point that I said, I'm tired, he said, you're tired of being there, and you're tired of being the only one. You need to remember that we used to not be there at all. And you need to wear that like a badge of honor and do what you need to make sure that you're able to bring people across.
Yeah. It's too much Those who much is given, much is required, right?
Exactly.
And at the same time, I love the fact that you named and noticed what was happening for you, that you were tired. I think so often Black women have that feeling, like literally of exhaustion on a Friday evening or over the weekend. And then you got to start back up again on Monday and you're not rejuvenated. Like your tank is still empty. And it's not because like you're running and doing a lot of different things. It's because of what you have to navigate, the subtle, quiet things that you're navigating, what people are asking, how you need to show up in those moments. What would you say now to Anucha 20 years ago that echoes what your father said in showing up, right? But may have a little bit more context or contour to it?
Sure. Well, it's everything from I could have never worn braids
Okay.
at that first job
Yeah.
at IBM. And it was not like there was a rule that you couldn't wear braids, but I remember having this conversation with my sister, Ruth, who's, she's been a CEO at a couple of organizations. She said, they're never going to say anything to you, but it's a note to file. She looks too ethnic.
Yes.
And it would hold you back. And so you think about the pressure and the weight of 30 plus 35, 40 years of that. What I would say to my younger self is that you're not alone. This is not a surprise. I think we need to arm our young Black women because even in the context of what's happening today with this racial reckoning, you're still having to navigate environments that are not accepting of you. Nothing has changed yet, right? And so I would say to myself, you're not alone. The fact that you're crying on Sunday night because you don't want to go back to work, you're not alone. There are thousands of you out there. But the most important piece is, I would say, get into a circle of other like-minded Black women who are experiencing this so that you can talk about your journey, so that it uplifts you and gives you energy on your Monday morning. And you have this network of women that will help you through it because they're also going through it and navigating through it. That's what I would say to my younger self. That didn't exist. And there was a reason why it didn't exist, because in many corporate environments, when a Black woman entered the space, it was a threat to other Black men and Black women. We were pit against each other because a Black woman represented a double minority. And so there were so many different dynamics going on in the corporate space that you didn't readily have that, hey, can you help? Can you talk? It was really a lonely journey.
Yeah. It's such an important point to bring up, right? Is you were pitted against each other. It was a zero-sum game. Like it's either you or me. It's not both of us, right? And that hopefully is changing, but there's still a strong undercurrent of that same thing. And it creates this environment, right? This really volatile environment where it does feel debilitating because just those people that understand what you're going through, you're competing against. And the system wants it that way.
Of course, it's divide and conquer. Absolutely. And it's been that way for centuries.
Yeah.
Who got to be in the slave master's house, right? This idea of just tearing us apart at the seams by any means necessary.
Yeah. An important note of why we need to understand our history. Right? We need to understand the history because a lot of the things that happened 400 years ago, right? And what you can find in the Museum of African American History is these stories of how structures and systems were put in place to pit us against each other and to hold us down from how amazing we were. One of the things I visited the museum in April, and on the sports exhibits, they talked about how in horse racing, we had jockeys that I think 13 of the first 18 competitions, Black jockeys won. And then all of a sudden you didn't see any Black jockeys. Like, so there's always been a lot of success. And as soon as we get too successful, they try to take it away. Were there moments on your journey where you were experiencing tremendous success? You were having a tremendous amount of impact in a situation, and all of a sudden, future opportunities were taken away?
I would say that it was more reminders of who you are and that you're not one of us. I remember getting my position at UNICEF and going to a board meeting and talking about enabling a domestic strategy in the United States, because when you peel back the data and you look at what's happening to kids internationally, you knew that communities of color, whether in Western Africa or in Asia and in underserved countries, children were doing very poorly. But when you peel back the data, adolescent boys of color in this country were mapping to kids in South Sudan who are child soldiers in terms of violence against them. And so you couldn't ignore what's happening here. And I remember trying to talk through that with someone and him waving a dollar and saying, you see this dollar, it's never going to be spent on a kid here. My money goes further overseas. And so I was like, wow, I'm not in Kansas anymore. Right. But it was this idea of kind of, who do you think you are? We're not doing this. And so that was a reminder and a wake-up call. And it was a wake-up call that was more along the lines of, be careful, and you might be here, but you're not one of us, right? And this just colonial way of thinking that I had to navigate. And so to me, that always seems like a challenge, and it's a challenge, and I take it as a challenge because it was not about ego, it was about the end game. Yeah. It was about doing what's right for children and about being true to the brand promise. If we are for every child, that means here too in the United States.
Absolutely. First and foremost, right? Well, and that is unlocking the club, right? Because for the majority of a lot of our careers, we have been trying to do those things, jump through the hoops, do what we're asked and do what was required so that we can get those opportunities and be seated at the table, or at least the proverbial seat at the table that we think that we want to be part of. But we'll never truly get to that table, like, because they don't want us there. And so how do we actually start to set our own table on this journey?
It's so true. Yeah. It's about investing in Black communities. It's about investing in Black men and women. It's about Black folks buying from Black folks. It really is about building and supporting our own infrastructures. And we've seen that through the years and how that's been torn down, but we have to continue. I think with this racial reckoning that we're seeing in this country since the killing of George Floyd, you wonder if people are getting tired, right? And they're not as inclined to do what's right. Do Black lives still matter? They mattered a little more 2 years ago. Yeah. What's going on? Yeah. Is everybody still saying that? What does it mean?
Yeah.
So you do see a little less support over time, but it's really up to us to continue to carry that torch and to speak truth to power and to do the great work that's necessary.
Yeah, to a certain extent, all of these things have been weaponized, right, in a way, and taking the essence of what we're trying to do and create and say, weaponizing it, which creates and fosters this sense of fear in the communities that they need to get riled up, right?
Absolutely.
You mentioned something earlier. You talked about how, crying on a Sunday night before having to go back in the office on a Monday. And I don't want to take that lightly, because I think that's a really important statement. I think there are many of us who maybe literally or figuratively are crying like on those Sunday evenings before we have to go back up at work. And there's some data recently in an article by the Harvard Business Review that talked about when companies were thinking about going back to the office, right? Stopping this work from home, maybe looking at hybrid. But the group of individuals that were most hesitant to head back into the workplace were Black women. And they had to unpack a little bit of that and look at the data to see why Black women were hesitant to show up in the office. And it was something that we probably had ignored and normalized for all of our careers, was the microaggressions that you had to deal with on a daily basis, that for 2 years, you didn't have to, because you were at home or in a place that you weren't having to show up and people talk about your hair or look at you and say that you're being too aggressive, right? Or that angry Black woman. Has that shown up for you as well? Like after COVID, are you noticing differently what you need and what you require to feel safe?
Depends what environment. I completely get that, right? The struggle is real, I would say. The microaggressions are real. And I would say that in my current environment, you get some, but not as much, right? Different being in an organization that's led by a Black woman, but there's still some lingering, but we call it out. We call it out and we talk about it really authentically. We talk about it at our all staff meetings. We call it out when we think it's happening. In my past jobs, we didn't see anything like that. So Of course, the microaggressions were ever present all throughout the organization. But I would say that, I recently went to a conference that really focused on radical rest
Radical rest.
and owning where you are and being okay with asking for help. And we talked about it from the context. At one point, we talked about it from these were all Black women. We talked about it in the context of cultural pressure, right? The pressures. And I remember a woman asked, like, what are some of the examples of things that we had to deal with in the past and we carry with us? And one of those is, if I don't work this hard or if I don't keep this job, my whole family will fall apart.
Yes.
Or I have to outwork my white counterparts 2 and 3 times. I have to work harder. I have to be better. And we talk about that. That's instilled in us. And it's instilled in us over generations. So you think about that generational stress that is at play. We've got so much else. The fact that we live in a society that just decimated our Black men, and we had to carry the family. All of that stress literally can change your DNA. And nobody talks about that. Nobody talks about the generational trauma and what it's done to us. And while we can't fall apart, it's really important to acknowledge it and own it.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and I talk quite often on the show about Dr. Resmaa Menakem, who talks about that in his book, My Grandmother's Hands. And literally, like, right, just looking at her hands after having picked cotton for generations, how, they had been destroyed, right? And you could see where the cotton ripped holes in her hands, but then they healed themselves. And there was that juxtaposition, like, right, that you see for Black women, the resilience to be able to overcome those wounds, but also the debilitating actions that take place because we have to lean in. And
yes,
I think that is a pressure that I agree with you. We do need that radical rest. And we need to talk about these conversations. What is it about us that over generations, we actually don't share the full truth?
I just think it's been the pressure of just having to walk through the mud for so long, to have to carry the baggage of centuries of trauma. The fact that I truly believe that it's the stress changes your DNA, where you almost become completely just, I don't know, programmed to deal with the stress, to walk through the stress. It's something that certainly helps us on these jobs where we're in all white environments, but it's not healthy for us. It just takes a toll over time. I think there's data to show that, like, the numbers of, like, autoimmune diseases that Black women are facing, so much of it is stress. It's not only stress on their jobs, it's stress in our families. And you know what? Another thing that we don't talk about as Black women is the challenges that we see with our children. And we don't talk to our children about what's running through their veins, right? The fact that you have families with histories of trauma or addictions. Native communities don't talk about it either. There are reasons why things are happening in our communities. There are things that we do to our children. We call them lazy. There's no Black child that I have ever seen that is lazy.
Exactly. Quite the opposite. Right?
Yeah. But we don't talk about it. We don't talk about it as mothers. We certainly don't talk about it as fathers, and we don't talk to our children. So for the most part, like, they have no idea what's happening to them. And just think about the power of knowing. If we began to talk to them about these things when they were younger, like, how much more aware they would be of their own bodies and their own chemistry and what's happening to them. Because they kind of walk through this life going, everything's great, got to do this, got to do that, can't mess up.
Yeah.
Or if they do complete failure, feeling like a complete failure, like, we don't talk about the why.
Yeah. No, it's true. It's Claude Steele in his book, Whistling Vivaldi, talks about stereotype threat and how it has this kind of passive impact on us. Like, right, because in the back of our mind, like, all of those things are churning, that you're thinking about how you don't want to show up as, or you don't want to be considered, or all the different implications, and how that creates that stress that you're referring to. And I agree. I think as you were talking, I was thinking my relationship with my mother, who later on in our journey, like we were much more candid and honest with each other. And it wasn't like we were lying to each other, but it was just, I wouldn't share some of those stories, the pain that I was experiencing in the corporate space, like with her, because I didn't want her to feel like she hadn't prepared me, right? I didn't want her to feel the stress or the disappointment that I was under as well. And so I kept it from her for the longest time. Like those bad days, like on the bad days, I would say, oh, things are great. Right? On the worst days, I would say things are okay. And I recognized that not sharing that was a disservice to me and to her and to the people coming behind me that I was trying so hard to make sure I was opening doors for and not making mistakes and closing those doors along the way.
Oh, so much. Completely get it. And I think that most importantly, our Black women, our Black men have got to talk to their children at a much younger age about this. It needs to be common. We need to talk about it at the dinner table, just like we have the talk
Yeah.
about what's going to happen, what could possibly happen if you're stopped by a cop, right? We have to have these talks throughout childhood with our young men and women so that they understand what's happening to them and what's going on with their bodies and their minds and how they feel, so that they own it and becomes power instead of a weapon against them.
Yeah. No, that's so, it reminds me, Anucha, I've heard and read a lot of articles or interviews that you've done, and you've often said throughout your career that you should lift as you rise. And that is an example of that, what you're talking about, or just right there. In addition to the talk, we need to share these stories. And lifting isn't always emphasizing the good, but it's also illuminating the challenges that we are going through. And so what does lifting as you rise entail? And I think it's important to kind of bring context. So what instances did you observe, whether it involved you or not, where that actually wasn't true, where you weren't lifted as you were rising?
Well, I can say that I have been so fortunate that throughout my career, wherever I was, when I felt in that space of true loneliness, there was always a woman or a man at times that lifted me, like came out of the woodwork and lifted me. And when I think about it in the context of our young women and men today, each one of us, each woman and each man should feel like there's a tribe behind them. And for all of us who are in the back nine of our careers, if we don't have 4 or 5 young people that we are lifting on a regular basis, we're stealing.
Yes.
Right? So there are women that I talk to throughout every month that are feeling challenged in their spaces. And I talk to them about where they are and the fact that they're not alone and they're not crazy.
Yes.
That's the really important point. Like, am I really feeling this? Is this really happening? Yes, it is. And then providing them with some cover and some strategies based on knowing. The power of knowing.
Yes.
is monumental. Can't even be measured. But lifting as you rise, and my mother used to always say that. We have a responsibility to do this for our young men and women because it's unrelenting. And I think in the context of what we've seen in the last 2 years, it's not going to stop, because we know for a fact that there are people that do not like the power, that don't like any shift. It's interesting, the book Caste.
Yes.
The first part of that book where she talks about all these people that were dying in remote Russia, right? They didn't understand why they were dying. And then they realized, wow, it was because of global warming. It had melted the permafrost. And all this, the anthrax that was in the carcasses of dead animals frozen under the permafrost was just unleashing. And it was the connection between that and what we've seen happen over the last several years relative to racism. It always sat below the surface. But now people are emboldened to talk about how they really feel. And for me, it's like, as It's good to know how you really feel.
Right.
We've known it, but now we've seen it.
Yes.
And I think about that from the context of young people. At least now they're operating and they know what's happening. They see it, whereas it was undercover. We never really heard about it. We knew people were feeling this way, but now it's kind of like out there in the open. So for me, that's a benefit.
Yeah.
Power of knowing.
The power of knowing. I love that because it draws me back to the meetings that you all have at Tides, like where you're saying that you're going to actually call it out and address what's going on. I'm not sure if we would have had the agency to do that 4 years ago, because they would have been like, you're calling out false shadows. But now it is out in the open. There is this emboldened energy that's in our space, and it gives us a chance to strategically direct our energy to counteract that.
Exactly. I think, we have an organization that we need to internally reflect the values that we're externally communicating. Right. So if we're saying we're shifting power and you have a Black CEO and there might be things that happen throughout the organization, it's important to call them out because the organization wants to really be true to our own Jedi values. And so we have a fantastic organization and we've given space to having that discussion amongst all of us. And I think it's been helpful. It's helpful that all of our colleagues, white, Black, are allies to each other and will identify when it's happening in the space and talk about it.
Name it and notice it. Well, I want to go back to, you mentioned earlier, one of your dream jobs, with the New York Knicks, that you would have taken the job without being paid. And I think that first, I want to stop there because I think oftentimes I know for other Black women that are so driven by purpose, and that sometimes we have said yes to an opportunity and ignored the financial aspect of it because we feel like we had to do what's right for our community or to have an impact. That show up for you in different spaces?
I would say only really in one, and that was the New York Knicks. I mean, it was so toxic. The environment was disgusting. I speak very, very liberally and authentically about the experience. It was one that I was just not prepared for, having come from a very corporate space, into this entertainment environment. I mean, one of the first meetings I remember having, I came into an office and I invited a team into my office, and some of the women took a seat, or some of the men took a seat on my couch, and then the women sat on their laps. And I was like,
What?
Yeah. Like, could you guys get up? Like, we don't do that here. And I just remember having the conversation about, hey, corporate dress and, hey, we're the team behind the team. And I remember someone saying, we're not at IBM. This isn't a corporate environment. It's the entertainment environment. And I'm like, okay, the thought cloud is like, yeah, but we're not the entertainers. Just making, but having the willingness to have conversations about that's always kind of been how I've been wired. The environment at the New York Knicks was so not for me. And I remember my mother saying one day, they don't deserve you. There's not a whole lot of class going on there. You need to leave. And I don't know if it was the athlete in me or just no, I'm not going to let them beat me down. Staying, this is where I want to be. And you do have to determine if the environment is truly for you, or if you really want to stay and ingest the toxicity over time, because it does affect you. And I was happy to, I probably should have left a long time ago, but they escorted me out the door because I complained about sexual harassment, and which led into this incredibly toxic public lawsuit. And I feel like I'm, way before Me Too. It was a very lonely journey. There was this expectation. I remember listening to some talk radio. And I remember someone saying, I can't believe, she's trying to bring this Black man down. And I was like, wait, I'm supposed to give him a pass? What is happening here? And so it was this example of okay, now we're, unfortunately, this was Black on Black, right? But I do remember saying to two executives, wow, there are three of us, 3 Black executives with this incredible opportunity. We got to figure out a way to make this work. We have to treat each other professionally. And 2 of us really felt good about that.
Mm.
One of us was like, good luck with that. And so it was unfortunate, but I look back on it and I am just so proud of having stood up for what was right. It was a toxic environment, it was steeped in sexual harassment. It was a hostile environment. There was so much retaliation for saying that it needed to be addressed. And while it was plastered all over the news, nobody tells you what you should expect if you file a sexual harassment retaliation lawsuit, but it needed to be. It needed to be exposed.
Yeah. Well, and thank you for sharing, because I know it can't be easy after having gone through that for years, right? To share that story on a regular basis, because I would sense that you probably want to close the door, right? And move
No,
forward and move on.
I'm good.
But you're good.
Actually, I'm good.
Really?
I am good because while I have become more comfortable talking about it, we have to talk about it.
Yes.
It's just like we have to talk about the challenges that Black women face.
Yeah.
Like you can imagine a Black woman is in this spotlight, right?
Yeah.
If I was a white woman, blonde hair, blue eye, they would have settled so fast.
Yep.
And really at the end of the day, it was a stroke of the pen for them because I'm not sure what changed. But there was so many elements and situations that really spoke to me being in this position as a Black woman.
Yeah.
Like they couldn't put me in a box.
Yeah.
Wasn't a cheerleader. I wasn't a groupie. I was a highly educated female Black executive and well compensated. So why would I be doing this?
Yes.
And so it forced them to address what happens in the workplace. And having had, 4 years of superior performance evaluations, it's kind of like, So I think it really posterized for them how you cannot retaliate, right? Because at the end of the day, most sexual harassment is about her word against his.
Yes. And power. Right.
But the retaliation piece was a gift, right? Like the day after I complained officially, I was literally escorted out of my job. Like, hey, we're going to need you to go home while we investigate. I'm like, really? Is he going home? And to have that happen, it was like, So that just kind of it was something I wasn't expecting. And then to be fired over the phone about that, it was just, there were so many things where I look back on it and I was like, this was crazy. Interestingly enough, what happens in those kind of suits is like a number of the women that I hired in the organization, lifted them, mentored them, promoted them through the organization, testified against me. And it was, listen to the signals, right? We think about what happens in, pitting one against the other. The fact that I was so swiftly fired sent a very strong message. You want to keep your job, keep your mouth shut, be happy with what you have, to the point where people are marching up to the witness stand, like just lying.
Wow.
And I said, okay. But that was a learning because they have to live with that, right? When you address what happened in the workplace, they didn't have a case.
Well, and I'm just sitting here, the strength that you were exuding and that you had to have shown up in that moment, grace, because you were vilified, right? Like I was in New York around that time, right? And it was not about all the things that were going on. It was about you, right? It was the Black on Black crime, right? It was you and Isaiah. It was all these other things and distractions. And never was the conversation about the workplace culture, right? Yeah. And so in light of all those things that you just shared and that were going on, how could you show up? What was it that gave you the courage, Anucha, to show up? Because many of us couldn't have in that moment. And what gave you the courage to speak your truth and fight for what you knew was right?
At some point, we're going to talk about Title IX. Right? I will tell you, I come from a family of strong women who have had to endure some incredible things and hardships. And I also am an athlete. And for me, it was like, are you kidding me?
Yeah.
It was just, every part of it was just so I'll tell you a quick story. I remember after I filed this lawsuit, we had press, and I was sitting with my lawyers, and you just don't even know what's happening, right? And I remember this press person wanting to take pictures, and they're like, "Hey, can you just turn around a little? Can you?" And I was like, "Okay." And it turns out that I had this button-down blouse on, and he wanted me to turn because as I was turning, the buttons were showed a gap, and
Oh
you
my
could
God.
see like my bra. Like he kept saying, "Hey, can you turn a little more?" And I didn't realize until it literally was on the newspaper the next day. And I remembered that moment, and I was like, "Wow, this is really deep." Like to me, I was horrified by it. But everything from, questioning why I was doing this, and my mother had just passed, and like making references to, she was having a breakdown because of my mother. My mother was like, "Are you kidding?"
Mhm.
Just everything from, "Well, do you curse?"
Mhm.
Really? I really do. I curse.
Right.
I think what you should say is, I was raised on a basketball court in Brooklyn, New York.
Okay.
I'm not a wilting rose. It took a lot for me to get to this point, right? But when you're referring to me as a bitch in the workplace, like to the point where I have to like go and just check my birth certificate to make sure my name says Anucha, right? When you are just so hostile to me for no apparent reason, and then you switch it
Mm.
and you start asking me to go to hotels with you. It was just crazy. There was so much about that was like, are people even going to believe that this is happening? I actually am just grateful that it happened in New York because there were progressive women on the jury. There were progressive men on the jury. And they looked at this and said, this was a hot mess, right? On so many different levels. But I will tell you that you do kind of get into this place where you cannot believe this is happening. And my sisters really sheltered me, but I just remember walking out of the courthouse one day. It was the first part of the lawsuit. And walking out of I saw this woman, she rolled, my sister, it was paparazzi. There were hundreds of people just surrounding me. And this woman drives past the federal courthouse in New York City. She rolls down her window, remember this white car. And this white woman, rolls down her window and she is crying. And she's screaming my name out. And she said, Anucha, I just want you to know what you are doing for every working mother and woman in America. And I remember I still get chills because at that very moment, I said, wow, this is so much more about bigger than me. Right? Because you just can't believe this is happening. And from that point on, and just like the feeling that my mother was at play in her, she was not letting this go awry, and just, the faith in God. I was sat in that courtroom every day and I was like, okay. I had no expectation that I was going to prevail in that lawsuit. I really didn't, because it was my 3-4 lawyers against their 50.
Right.
And it was the press, and I was like, this is bad. But I really think as people started to understand what the environment was like,
Yeah.
it was
Yeah.
like game, set, and match,
Right.
right? And the arrogance that was on display, like, who is this Black woman and who does she think she is? And I think all of that at play just really could expose it for what it was. And so while I don't necessarily like to go back there, I think it's healthy to go back there. I don't by any stretch of the means think I'm this perfect person. I certainly I'm not, and I was not sweet Polly purebred, which was more of the reason why people had to take note and say, why would she do this?
Exactly.
It's kind of like, well, why would you fire me and escort me, literally have a security person escort me out of the office because I complained? But that happened. I tell you, it was lonely. I wouldn't wish it on my worst enemy. When women say they're considering, if I was to chronicle what a woman goes through, I don't know if anybody would do it. Right now, I feel better about there being a larger tribe of women supporting women through these kinds of complaints, but it was terrible. I do think that it took years for me to heal.
Well, and how did you heal?
How did I heal? I mothered, I parented,
Mm.
I moved, I went to work for, I think one of the most amazing athletic directors in all collegiate sports. That's Ward Manuel, who's now at Michigan, who was Buffalo at the time. And I had known him years before. He knew who I was. And he took me under his wing. He allowed me to heal. He's pro Black women. He's pro women who have a voice and speak truth to power. He's not full of ego. He's willing to hear criticism. So I went to work for a phenomenal man and a phenomenal family and was able to heal during my time at Buffalo. And then I moved to the NCAA. And it was interesting because worked for interesting people. It was positive in the standpoint of, when I took that job, I said, listen, you do know what you're getting, right? You're getting someone who's going to speak up, right? I'm not going to just sit around. So when we had discussions on issues like Title IX, I was very clear about the importance of not rolling things back for women and for doing what's right for women and providing equity. And I highlighted things that were not equitable. And so it was only a couple years after that all of that came tumbling down by, what was witnessed with like just the ability to have training at the women's regionals and Final Four that was similar to the men.
Yeah.
So all of that was kind of orchestrated while I was there. Yeah. And I spoke up, and, if people weren't willing to listen, it came back to bite them.
Yeah. Well, you spoke up, right? And it's not lost on me, Anucha, how so very often men, women, Black, right, like whatever,
Yeah.
we look at the consequences, and the consequences or the potential consequences dictate our action. And you did what you knew what was right in those situations, right? With the Knicks, at the NCAA, fighting, right? And letting people know, look, I'm not going to be a shrinking violet in these rooms. You're hiring me for who I am and what I embody and the perspective that I bring to the table. Like, how can we conjure that essence up more and unlock that for people? Like, how can we encourage folks to show up that way? Because if we can be emboldened to share our truth in those moments where there may seem to be consequences, we can unlock a lot of these clubs.
Well, I do think we need to really pay more attention to having young people sitting at the table when we're having these conversations and training them up. I can't say enough about the power of Title IX. We're in our 50th year and the impact that it's had on me, but I often very much recognize and highlight that because of systemic racism that exists, Title IX was put in place to level the playing field. Mm. And the way that it bears itself is that states and communities and municipalities have to put money into communities, into high school athletic programs. And unfortunately, that isn't done in inner cities or poor communities. And as a result of that, the vast majority who have benefited from Title IX have been white women. And we have to talk about that. This is not about us against white women. It's about demanding that governments and municipalities are equitable in terms of their distribution of funds so that Black children can play sports like lacrosse and volleyball and swimming and field hockey and golf. Doesn't exist in communities of color. And so Title IX, I am a Title IX baby. You have to address the children that have been left behind and have not benefited from Title IX in the way they were supposed to.
So glad that you went there. I was on Instagram a few days ago, and one of our previous guests, Julie Lithcott-Hames, who is running for city council out in Palo Alto, had a post that was created. Some of the art was created by the Female Quotient, but it was a post of all these things that women could not do before certain dates. It was obvious that Title IX was the catalyst for changing so many of these different things. So before 1974, women weren't able to apply for credit. Before 77, workers couldn't take action against sexual harassment in the workplace. Before 73, women couldn't serve on a jury in all 50 states. Before 72, women couldn't run in the Boston Marathon. Before 78, women couldn't legally be fired from their workplace for being pregnant, or they could, right? Before 98, people could not access the morning after pill. All of these different things, like, right, you couldn't breastfeed publicly. Title IX has had an incredible impact on you and I and so many others. And I don't think that we talk about it enough. Like, we celebrate it, in June of every year. We recently celebrated the 50th anniversary, but tell us more about like how you have noticed how Title IX, you being a Title IX baby, has impacted your journey.
Sure. I always like to remind people that the most popular sports for women prior to Title IX were cheerleading and square dancing.
Unbelievable.
Those were the sports that most women were allowed to participate in, quote, sports, in high school. Just think of your child comes home and says, hey, I want to play softball. And mom says, nope, but you can square dance.
Yeah.
I mean, you can't even believe, right? It's kind of like, boom, that tells you everything.
Yeah.
With the impact, we know that 95+% of women who sit in C-suite positions today played organized sport. But here's the other side of this. Way back when, 50 years ago, men had no idea of the far-reaching impact of Title IX. And this behind the scenes effort to dismantle and roll it back has been at play for 50 years, just like Roe v. Wade.
Yeah.
For 40 years, there has been a move to roll back women's reproductive rights. Because at the end of the day, there are a lot of folks that want us back in the kitchen.
Exactly.
And so that is not just the feminist coming out in me. That is the parent. That is the future thinking like, you roll back Title IX, and there are efforts to roll back Title IX. I don't think that people are as focused on what's happening in collegiate sport. Once you start paying players, once you start paying collegiate athletes, if the school is paying a collegiate athlete, if you get to that point, well, that means that that student athlete becomes an employee of the university. And once they're an employee of the university is no longer bound by Title IX, which means the university is going to have an opportunity to say, you know what, maybe we just want football and men's basketball and maybe women's basketball, which says goodbye to all of those wonderful Olympic sports. And you think about the hundreds of thousands of women who will lose opportunities. And so while we're thinking about how great this is and how we're starting to level the playing field because you have coaches that are making $15 million, right? And student athletes that are not, we have also got to think about the far-reaching impact of this road toward monetizing your sport as a student athlete, and just be real careful that we don't pull levers that will roll back the power of Title IX, because you're rolling it back for all.
Yeah.
And so while we need to figure it out, right? We need to figure out how one kid has no money and has to scrape the barrel of the bucket to just get to college, right? And the coach gets 10, 12 million a year, right? We have to figure out how to reconcile that.
Yes.
In doing that, we don't want to dismantle Title IX, just like we've seen in women in reproductive rights, right? We know that there is a real concern about people of color and minorities being the majority population, right? So what in the world could help? Well, I don't know, forcing white women to have babies. This is not rocket science, right? And what else could help? Forcing Black women to have babies before they're ready. And we know that if a woman is forced to have a baby before she's ready, she's living in poverty.
Yeah.
Like that is, the data doesn't lie. But this work has been at play for many years. And so we have to talk about it. We have to speak truth to power. We have to be active about it. And we have to ensure, number one, that our young girls and our young boys are playing sports. It needs to be part of their lives. Ballet is a sport.
Yeah.
Hey, chess is a sport. The extracurricular activities for our children are so important because it really does help them develop leadership skills.
It does. And you talk about earlier the power of knowing, like all of this information incredibly important. And we think about Title IX, and you stated some data about the number of leaders, female leaders, that benefited from Title IX. And we know that in most of those organizations, they lead differently. They leverage power differently. You've talked about it at Tides as well. And that is another thing that people are afraid of, right? There is more of a sharing of power in those situations. And we can look at it globally, right? With New Zealand's prime minister, et cetera. Like, right? Women lead differently. And so there's no wonder that we want to have fewer women leading so that we don't create these systems and the structures where the levers of power are changed from where it has been historically. And so really important.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. It is so time for more women to be in positions of power and influence across the world. When we look at issues of violence against women that play out throughout so many different cultures and communities, and then the impact of women in positions of power. We've seen so much testosterone, and here's where we are.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
We've seen it. And I am waiting and hoping for the United States to step up and elect a woman to lead this country. We've seen what the impact of centuries of men leading.
Yes.
We need a woman in place.
Yeah.
And that is not just in the United States, but throughout the world.
Yeah. And it's not just about who's qualified and who's not, because we've seen somebody who is ultra qualified who didn't get the opportunity. And so that speaks a lot to what is happening in this country around our lack of willingness to elevate women to positions of power. Like there's resistance that's taking place, but that resistance hasn't kept you back. And it doesn't go without notice for me, for you, Anucha, of you playing sports. You talk about it quite often in talking about your journey, how you're, again, from Brooklyn, you were playing hoops on the streets of Brooklyn, but you don't back down from the next opportunity. So I'm wondering, what's the next club you want to unlock?
I'm in it. The work that I'm doing with Tides, for the first time in my life, I am doing work that is specific and directly impacts BIPOC leaders. And so this is the work that I want to do. You think about, why God put you in different positions. All of those roads led me here. And so I always say there's a song, God Bless the Broken Road, that led me to you. It is so real. The road has been broken at times, but it's also been filled with joy and strength and support. And so I think about all of our journeys, the peaks, the valleys, it's all for a reason. And I say this now, I wish I had known it. You're exactly where you need to be because it's preparing you for what's next. And so all of those challenges, all of those struggles, all of those fights, all of those tears, all of those times that have revealed what people are about, right? When you think that, 10 people are in your corner and you realize at the end of the day, it's only 2. Those things are so important, but they reveal things to you and they reveal things about you that are necessary on your path. And so I just say that if we could get into this place where we would just let go and let God, it would be so much better for us internally in terms of stress. It's hard to do in the moment. It's hard to do in the mire and the mess. But I think about all of those different challenges and how it has equipped me for where I am today.
And it has equipped you to continue to lift as you rise. And we are all blessed to be able to navigate a space where you are in a leadership position where you can continue to have an impact because the work that you're doing is going to impact all of us. So thank you for leaning in to the challenge and the obstacles along the way and being where you are today. And thanks for being on Unlocking the Club. We're actually going to come back with more with Anucha Browne here on Unlocking the Club for the back 9. We'll be right back in a moment. Do you want to stop feeling like you have little to no control over your life's journey and instead amplify your life's purpose? You all know me as Angela Taylor, host of the Unlocking the Club podcast, but I am also a business, career, life, and leadership coach, helping my clients to live their best life. Every day, I help my clients discover what they truly want in life and then unlock the club on how they can live their best life. If you're like many of my clients, you have found yourself over the years prioritizing everyone else and everything else. Your job, your significant other, your family, your friends, your community, the list goes on and on. Well, I'm here to tell you the best thing you can do for others is to invest in yourself. You don't have to have all the answers. You don't need to succumb to the fear of failure. You don't have to be perfect. You don't need to feel like you're being selfish. You simply need to prioritize you. You may be thinking that coaching is for other people, but trust me when I say that we all could benefit from a good coaching relationship. Together, we'll build a plan to help you amplify your gifts, clarify your goals, and accelerate your journey toward the life you desire, which may be finding financial wealth, spiritual health, relationship success, and/or freedom and flexibility. You no longer have to feel like you aren't welcome into someone else's club. Let me empower you to leverage all of your extraordinary gifts and create your own club. Head on over to unlockingtheclub.com to book a free 20-minute introductory call to learn more about our Unlocking Your Journey coaching packages, or use code UNLOCK to get a 15% discount on the 6-month coaching package. Today is the day to invest in yourself. Let's unlock your journey. All right, welcome back to Unlocking the Club. I'm your host, Angela Taylor, and I'm here with Anucha Browne, and we are talking about the power of knowing. We're talking about lifting as you rise and radical rest. And Anucha, as I listen to all the things like that you have had to navigate, I wonder where those spaces are, aside from your home, where you feel the safest to be yourself.
The safest to be myself amongst friends. Amongst friends, it's interesting. I have a core group of women who I've known since high school.
Nice.
And we are connected at the hip. We spend an unbelievable amount of time together and talking and gifting to each other. And these are 5 white women.
Nice. That's awesome. Who would think, right?
Yeah, right. And then I also have a group of women, Black women, who I balled out in the streets of New York and Philadelphia and, all over. Went to AAU tournaments in Vegas and played 3-on-3 world championships in Texas. We have been everywhere together, and we're growing old together. And so I break bread with them, spend time with them, mentor them. They mentor me. It's that space where we can so keep it real.
Yeah.
And then I also have a group of several Black female executives that are currently working in sport, working throughout the mentoring world, developing young Black women and Black men, women that are doing incredible things. And we get together, and that's our lean in circle. When we talk about these things, and we spend every year, we go away for 3 or 4, 5 days, and we spend time. And then I have a group of young people I mentor, and that's my opportunity to work with them and work on our future. And most importantly, I break bread with my kids and my sisters. And that is probably where I get my greatest strength, because that's where the bloodlines come into play. That's where we talk about our history as Indigenous peoples of the United States. That's where we talk about our history of Guyanese men and women with my father. That's where we talk about our history with my mother and her grandmothers, and they were Native Americans, but they were also Black women who cleaned houses and raised children for white folks. I mean, we talk about all of that. So my greatest strength comes right here from my family.
It's amazing, and underscores how important it is for us to find our community, right? The community where you can exhale, where you can relax and unwind and be real and authentic and candid. invite you in, like, right, where you don't have to feel like you're banging on the door of the club. You're actually setting the tone for the club. I love that. I know, being from Brooklyn, right, you didn't have many instances of having trepidation, but I wonder, something that you used to have trepidation for that you no longer do.
Speaking authentically about the challenges of being a Black woman in a position of power, in a position of influence. And I speak to that from the standpoint of experiences that I've had, good and bad, with white men, primarily, with the support that I've seen from white women, and then sometimes not. And I speak about it so authentically because I want women to know that they're not crazy.
It's true. What you're feeling is true, right?
I don't know if you've ever read the book Straight No Chaser. I'm trying to think of what, and then there's a book called Trespassing.
Okay.
And it's the story of Black women in corporate America and trying to navigate. And in one case, it's about how this woman was just driven to alcoholism. And another, it's just how this woman was driven to just say enough. I read those books long ago, and they're still so ever present today. But owning that toxicity and not the inability to handle it can make us ill, will work itself out of your body in different ways. And while we think over time that, oh, we got this, it's okay, internally it's just festering and it's eating you. And you have to be able to speak to it, and you have to be able to own that it's happening and why it's happening. And then you have to figure out ways to make sure you can take a deep breath.
Take a deep breath. Well, and so what are those spaces where you're able to center yourself and to take that deep breath?
I started to notice probably 2 years ago how little I was breathing. Like, many people go through the entire day without breathing in deeply.
Yes.
And exhaling. Yeah. Like, just think about it. When you do it, it feels so different, right? Yeah. And so I have just started to take note of that and to try to do that several times a day. That is incredibly helpful. I am an adrenaline junkie. I probably try to go to Coney Island to ride the Cyclone once a week.
No way. Are you serious? I love that.
That 100-year wooden roller coaster, it is like, when I get there, I'm like, I am straight Brooklyn. And they know me. Now they're like, they know who I am. There she is. And, it's $10 to ride. And I get back on the train and come home. And it is just, I love Brooklyn. I love my Brooklyn. I love my New York City. I am born, bred, will never leave there. I love my community, everything about it. And, so those things give me joy. I love finding my way to Massachusetts, where I just enjoy the outdoors, enjoy the water. So I try to do that. And I think having those conversations with my own kids, my own young adults, they've taught me a lot. I'll say something and they will snap back in a heartbeat. And then we'll have a real authentic discussion. And I'm like, wow, you know what? You just changed my mind. When your parents used to say something, you'd be like, okay. Yeah. And now it's so much more meaningful to have that dialogue and to have thoughtful conversations about everything, about different identities and how people show up, and mental health and race and how it reveals itself. So having those, now my young adults are of that age. I just wish I had those conversations earlier and sooner with them. And I encourage women to do that, to have those hard and tough conversations and get comfortable with being uncomfortable. Everything from sex to sexuality, to race, to trauma, to stress, to joy. Yeah. Those are such important conversations to have. And then talking about it in the context of generations is huge.
So important, so important. And so two things that I heard you'd say. One is taking the time to notice what restores your soul. If it is going to Coney Island and getting on a roller coaster, if it is sitting at the beach, if it is in your garden, like, right, of really investing in yourself. Because I think so often as Black women, we invest in everybody else. Like, right, we set the table for everyone else to find those spaces where they can restore themselves and fill their tank. And we sacrifice and jeopardize doing that for ourselves. And so prioritize that. And what is required there is to pause for a moment, to reflect, not to always stay in action. Because it's easy to like stay in motion and action. And then the other thing, I love the conversations that you're actually having. And as I was listening to you, I was like, those are all the things that we were saying. You can't have those conversations at the table. Don't talk about money at the table. Don't talk about politics. Like all of those topics that, in our generation were off limits. Those are the conversations you actually should be having with your family and friends and children. And I think an important conversation that we don't talk about enough is failure. I know for the majority of my career, I didn't talk about my failures, like, right? Maybe like the small projects, but not the significant failures that I had in my life. And it gave those failures more power than they should have had in the first place. And so I love that you are doing that for your children.
Absolutely. And it's so necessary. I think when people think about my career, I'm like, oh, you've had so many wonderful opportunities. You've gotten so many great opportunities. And I'm like, yeah, but they came with some failures. Yeah. Right? And I don't consider getting fired and escorted out of my job at New York Knicks as a failure. That was a gift, right? In so many different ways, but it was a learning gift, right? But I talk about this importance of, there have been times I failed with people, and I've had to learn about how I'm coming across and how I can better come across. And that's really important. And letting people get to know you. It's hard for us, right? We're always sometimes in these very, very elitist colonial environments, and we're like odd man out, and we have to make them feel comfortable. And in doing that, we lose part of ourselves. And when I took this job, somebody was talking to me one day, and I said, you know what? I've been code switching for 40 years. Like at some point, you forget who you are.
Yes.
Right? So it's so important to have that conversation with my daughter and with my boys about that. That's huge. It's powerful. And for them, as early as you can have those conversations, it helps them so they're not, full of this sense of like, I'm not good enough, or this is why is this happening? Because those failures are meant to help you grow. Yes. And there's a reason for every failure, right? I would hope. Yeah. I have seen there's a reason for every failure. And life isn't perfect. And it's not supposed to be, and it's okay. And those who come across as living the perfect life and living in the perfect family, they're lying. They're lying. They're lying.
Exactly.
They're lying every time they open their mouth. They're lying. It's not real. Like sometimes you come across like people, I'm like, boy, her kids are amazing, and their family's amazing. It could be ugly in that house. We just don't know it.
Exactly. The Instagram culture, right? We look for the best pictures to post on internet. And if you take that into your everyday life, that's a burden to bear, right? Trying to be perfect and just enjoy. I think that there's so much beauty in the imperfection.
There so is. And the challenges that our young people are faced with now, the Instagram, the web culture, what they are exposed to at such an early age is unrelenting. And they feel like they have to live up to something. Everything is so transactional. Yeah. Even when you swipe up, you can swipe up and swipe down on Tinder. You can decide whether you want a relationship or if you just want a one night. It's like, what? Yeah. That's what our kids are exposed to. Yeah. And that's real. And we need to talk about that with our young people. Yes. Like that's what they're living today. And so when folks have blanket kind of, references to our young people and what they're about, whether it's, those millennials or those Gen Zs, it's like, you have no idea what those young people are going through to try and grow up in a way that you would like to see them succeed and thrive. They are fighting so many demons and so many influences that we couldn't even begin to imagine. And every single thing that they do is broadcast. Yeah. So it's just It's a completely different life for them, which is more of a reason why we need to have the conversations with them that are tough and uncomfortable and keep having it.
Yes. Well, and the last question on this note, because I think I would be remiss in not bringing this up because of the connection you've had with the NCAA, is it feels like over the last 12 to 18 months, there have been a number of student athletes who've committed suicide. And I think that what you were just pointing to, the pressure, like the pressure that these kids have as soon as they can pick up a ball or start to throw a ball, right, to get a college scholarship from their parents, their community, or whoever, right, to be great, to be a starter, to have successful outcomes. And then it's all broadcast on social media. Like, what do you see on college campuses with coaches and administrators that needs to be done to help to surround them? Because we don't have enough mental health professionals on college campuses. Like the ratio of students to mental health professionals is minuscule. It's crazy. Like, what can we do to make sure these student athletes can lean in and enjoy the journey versus feeling so much pressure?
Well, I think it's been, it's been posterized and been even accelerated as a result of COVID and young people living in isolation. It's not normal. It's not healthy. But I think the culture in youth sport is beyond unhealthy. The fact that these young people become investments to their families, their mothers, their fathers, they've spent so much money to get them the college scholarship. By the time they get to college, they're exhausted. They're just like, really? Okay. I remember as an administrator, some of the recruits would come and I'd talk to them and their parents would be talking for them. And you'd ask them, okay, what do you want to do? And what you want to hear is, hey, I want to get a degree. I want to win a championship. And they're like, I just want to have fun. And I'm like, okay. But that really says, right? I think parents just need to make sure it's not for them, right? It needs to be for the young person, and everyone isn't wired to need to go to the next level and be a collegiate athlete. And there's a lot to be said about having a life that allows you to distance yourself from sport and be healthy with it. But the idea of the mental health challenges that we're seeing with young people in college, it's real, and our athletic departments need to step it up. Everyone on staff needs to be trained in identifying signals. And we need to talk to our young people about it the day they walk on campus. And not only talk about it individually, but talk about it as a group and make sure that young people are allies to each other. The best ally to a young person that's struggling mentally is their teammate.
Yes.
Someone their age. I feel like every single university should have a mandatory course for every college freshman that is about being an ally, is about identifying the signs, is about understanding internal, like what is happening to you as a college freshman, isolated away from home for the first time in their life, potentially being a minority on an all-white campus or a predominantly white campus, or being of different sexuality, right? And feeling isolated, or understanding what's happening to yourself and your understanding and coming out with your own identity. All of those different, or the fact that college is hard. You weren't the greatest student, or you're not getting the playing time. You come from being the greatest to like now you're at the end of the bench. All of those things, like having those discussions with young people. Not only that, but for women, understanding what's happening to them hormonally. Nobody talks about the impact of PMS on a young woman who is an athlete, away from home, not playing, or not the star, the pressures of school. All of that matters. And we just have to be willing to have those conversations and help young people become allies to each other.
So well said. And Anucha, I have to thank you so much. I could go on in this conversation because you have such a wealth of experience and perspective to share with our audience. And I know, speaking on behalf of our audience, thank you for being so candid and honest and sharing your insight, your perspective, and your journey with us today on Unlocking the Club. Before we go, what projects are you working on, or where can our listeners find you?
I'm at Tides. I'm all over Tides. So it's tides.org. We are working on everything from ensuring that we have voter rights. We are working on reproductive rights for women. We are working on everything from racial justice to addressing issues of policing in our communities. Those are things that we're working on, we care about. everything from education to working with Indigenous communities and addressing the needs. But it's about it not only addressing the needs, it's about shifting power. For once, talking about it differently. It's not about giving someone a bottle of water. It's about building the well.
Okay.
It's about shifting power and shifting agency. And that's the work of Tides. Janice Evans Page, greatest CEO in the history of the planet. I am just so grateful for her having me as one of her staff and chief impact officer. And I love the work that I'm doing. So my back nine is Tides.
I love it. And as Janice has said, thank you, Queen, for all that perspective and the work that you were doing at Tides and the work that you've done throughout your journey in unlocking the club. What you did, the New York Knicks, and that woman that drove by the courthouse. I think many women felt the same way. And the work that you did at the NCAA, obviously very near and dear to my heart. And certainly the things that are happening now result in a direct correlation to the work and the impact that you've had. So thank you so much. I look forward to continuing to witness the impact that you have as we shift power through the work that you're doing at Tides. And thank you for unlocking the club today here on our podcast.
Thank you so much, Angela. And you know you're a queen. Thank you for all you do.
Thank you. Wow. That was an amazing conversation. And as Anucha talked about, having these conversations are so important. And so I'm incredibly grateful for Anucha for carving out time to be in conversation with us today. I learned so much, and there's no doubt in my mind that she's going to have a tremendous impact at Tides as we look to shift power. So what are those spaces that you are shifting power? Where can you continue to have more candid and honest conversations with yourself and with others? How do you find that radical rest that she spoke of? And then how can you lift as you rise? Again, to those of us who much is given, much is required. And if you can reach back and pull someone else up through your story, through telling an honest, candid story, talking about your failures, we can change the world and we can have that impact. And we can start to shift the balance of power in this world. So for Angela Taylor, thank you so much for listening to this episode of Unlocking the Club. Until next time, be well.
Thanks for listening to Unlocking the Club. If this conversation resonated with you, subscribe to our podcast on iTunes or your favorite streaming platform so that you can experience every episode. And follow us on social media, where you'll hear about future guests, access special features, and connect with this amazing community. Head on over there and let us know how you are unlocking the club. Until next time, peace.